So much for being willing to do a 2-hour computer workshop. You guys are rock stars yourselves, so thank you so much. Yes, the those of you who have participated in some of our Mindful Seed workshops and things, thank you for coming back. Deb and I are having a blast with this, so it's always rewarding that people are coming back. They like it. So that's really good to know. As we go through the slides, I'll have to, Kelly's managing the slides from her screen, so I'll have to guide her and switch now and that. So sorry about that inconvenience, but thank you for being patient with that too. Kelly, the next slide will kind of get us into this idea of monotasking. And if you haven't yet explored monotasking, I encourage you to. It's the new trend, but like back to the old days. I found your mascot from 1976 on a web search, and so I thought that was real. I love this mascot. And so we're going back to 1976. If you do have a phone or other things, you know that we get distracted so easily. So if those distractions are minimized, I think it'll just help all of us to stay in our sense of self in current time. And I really love this phrase, current time. It's been a part of my vocabulary for a long time now. I don't even remember when I first learned it. It's a way for us to monotask. And when we come into current time with yourself, the beauty of it is that each of us will have our own experience of what that personally means. And over time, as I've shared this, I really love this idea of a common understanding rather than a definition. Because, when we hear this word definition, and we're all educators, so we get vocabulary, we understand how vocabulary creates our capacity to learn. And so when we define a word, it's definite. It's very narrow and kind of constricted. And so when we can consider a common understanding, it allows each of us to bring our personal narrative. And there's some really beautiful research by, this name is so much fun to say, Dr. Mary Helen E. Mordino Yang. And she looks at the human brain with the fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance imaging. So she actually sees what happens in the brain as it's learning. And then she layers over that learning experience with emotion. So if a student is in a positive the emotion set, like a mindset, an emotion set, compared to a disrupted emotion set or an upset emotional state, what happens in the actual brain. And so part of her research is that we each need to honor our personal narrative, and because that's how we make meaning of incoming information. And so when we can have this common understanding that current time is being here with what we're doing, our task at hand, but also my inner world, what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body. And when we are doing this for ourselves, then it will spill out into our time with our students, and we can help them as we start the instructional delivery, whichever method we choose. We can help our students come into this classroom. So my background is Spanish, and so that's what I'll use as examples. So for you, please fill in your own subject area. And so as my students are coming into Spanish, we take a little transition time. The hallways are busy. And as we're working through online learning, maybe they just were doing texting or social media. And so coming into their Zoom classroom, we still need that transition. So come into current time with yourself. Are you still stuck in that social media interaction that you were texting or whatever it was, posting, and you're still a little bit heated because the thread was a little provocative. And when we get back into the actual physical building, that transition of the hallway is, the mind just goes everywhere. And so to come back into current time, we're in Spanish now. You fill in your subject area. And here we are. Take some breaths. And you can take your breaths now if that feels like a nice place for you to breathe. And then in current time, just kind of check in. Am I intellectually available, or am I still wrapped up in some drama that happened in the hallway? Am I hungry, and so my brain doesn't have enough nutrient to be fully aware and focused? And so that current time thing can be really useful to settle in. Okay, this is what we're doing now. And Kelly, if you'll just hit that, the little, I guess the return button to get the next part of that slide. When we can come into current time, we're able to set our intentions to focus. What will I be doing for this next hour and a half? I'm just thinking back to being at Carson High with the longer block period. And if your Zoom session classroom is 30 minutes, okay, why am I here for the next 30 minutes? And for us today, why am I here for the next 2 hours? It's a long chunk of time behind a computer screen. When we know our why, we can stay focused. We can pull from the information that we're learning, and those things that really resonate. Here's a neat thing. They resonate because they fit our personal narrative. And so when we can tune into, just again, going back into that Spanish classroom, we come in, we transition. There's usually a opener activity on the board or something to kind of bring the student mind into your subject. So along with coming into current time, your intention. And that is such a beautiful place to reconnect what was happening last class period. When we see our kids every other day, there's a lot that happens in the space of a day. And so for us to facilitate our students coming back into what we were talking about last class period and kind of have that review. And so why am I here today? I'm going to build on what we were doing yesterday, and I'm going to take those concepts and apply them into life, into the project I'm working on, into a new set of knowledge that will be unfolding. And so it can be, for you as the teacher, it's a really great opportunity to start your day, right? We'll just talk about doing our online learning here. Okay, why am I here today? Man, I got a lot of home projects I could do. Those kind of things. And so we know as teachers what we're doing and why we're doing it. Sometimes we lose track of it. So it's just a chance to come back in and get centered and stay focused. When we can harness the power of focused awareness, our short-term memory has a much better chance of moving the relevant information into the long-term memory. So focused awareness on incoming information, lacing it, interweaving it into the personal narrative, and then being able to store it in the long-term memory is one of the goals of learning, of course. And then with the social emotional learning, it's the goal. Reaching each student where they are so that they can interweave into their personal narrative. And so if you have not yet, take just a moment to consider your intention. Yeah. There's a little tiny piece of that personal intention as we reconnect, with our intention of facilitating learning for our students. We bring our students into our heart and mind, and then we connect with them on a different level. And so that awareness is I guess we can say cornerstone. I kind of like that word. Cornerstone of the social emotional component of academic development. We really need to connect with our students, and when we can do that first within the space of our own mind and heart, then when it shows up out there in those interactions with our students, it has a more authentic vibe. I guess we could say vibe. And so as we move in then, what is SEL, what is SEAD, and are they different? I will be sharing with you some of the history and does the science fit into what, maybe a little bit, of what these are and how they came about in the education world. And I was really skeptic when this stuff came into the education world. I remember specifically, I was in Washoe County and we were a pilot district for the CASEL, who is the Consortium of Social, Emotional, Academic Learning. And that happened in about 2011. But this has been around way longer than that. And so the history is really juicy and useful. I think when we know a little bit of the history and the who behind the what, it helps us understand on a different level what the goal is and how the procedures roll out to accomplish that goal. And they are a tiny bit different. They come from the same foundation. The SEAD is what the Nevada Department of Education has adopted rather than SEL. And that shift from SEL to SEAD is a result of where we land on the national rankings in our educational numbers. And, being at the bottom, there was a big focus, and it was with Steve Canavero when he was the education guy at the state superintendent. And his focus was really, really on getting that increased academic achievement. And through his research, and I met with him a couple times and attended several presentations, he really was using the research of social emotional as the driver of academic performance. And so it was at that time that the state of Nevada went to SEAD. And then as Dr. Deb and I created Mindful SEAD, our idea was to really bring in the idea of paying attention. And what are we paying attention to? We're paying attention on the inside, knowing how I learn best. As a student, I'll talk from the student perspective and then I'll flip over to the teacher perspective. And so for the student, as we're sharing this social, emotional, academic development stuff, we would love for our students to have self-awareness on how they learn. What's their best learning style, so to speak? Do they like to read? Are they linguistic? Do they devour books and books and books? Do they listen? Do they need to get up and do? Are they kinesthetic learners and they have to touch and they have to feel and they have to have the manipulatives? So helping students understand that, and then helping them understand what they're good at, what they like, and what their strengths are. And so as that self-awareness is our first stepping stone in, then a student would have the foundation to build the social emotional skills, strategies, and techniques that move that student to a higher level of academic achievement. As we're working with the teacher perspective on Mindful SEAD, a lot of it is the same. It's a level of self-awareness of being really comfortable with how I deliver content knowledge, how my interaction, and when we say interaction, maybe we think of my presence as the teacher. How does my presence contribute to my students being able to hear the information, to process that, and then over, those steps of analyzing and synthesizing, how do I facilitate application of knowledge? And so in that teacher mindfulness, that self-awareness, it's paying attention through a lot of reflection. And I think most of us did this. For some of us, it's been a long, long time ago in our years, especially during our time as a student teacher. When you had to keep your reflection journal of what you did and how it worked and how it affected student outcomes. And so it might be, in a sense, a return to that sense of reflective processing of how my instruction, my presence, my sense of self, my sense of facilitation with relationship can help my students achieve their academic goals. And so that is the mindful SEAD perspective of bringing awareness, social learning, emotional learning, and we're really fond of the personal narrative. It's a huge part of how we teach and how we facilitate development in those who have joined our workshops, being able to pay attention to the self. And then, Kelly, if you'll just hit the return button, maybe twice, what is mindfulness? And we all have a perspective. Does anyone have any comments? On this chat thing, that could be a useful place. I just opened that. Oh, JP, thanks. You guys are the rock stars. Does anyone have any comments that you would like to share with the group on your perspective of mindfulness? And now here's the really cool thing about it. Since it comes from your personal narrative and your experience in life, there's no wrong answer. What we do is we look at everybody's, or whoever would like to share, as we look at those experiences, we weave that into our common understanding. And that's what, again, I love this common understanding word. That's what gives it so much rich depth and can connect us as a community, is that we're seeing, we're on a tiny level, we're able to experience with each other what we know of mindfulness. Any ideas that you want to drop down there in the comments? Because I can talk for days on that.
Well, I agree with what you said. Mindfulness, if I understand correctly, is paying attention through a lot of reflection.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
But I'm copying you, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right.
There's no coming out of this one.
That's all right. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we're paying attention. We're in that idea of current time. Paying attention, what's happening to me? How is my story affecting how I receive the information? JP, mindfulness is being aware of your own personal strengths and weaknesses and being willing to process through humility. Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Knowing where you are as a learner, which is so useful for students, as they can articulate that to us, it takes a lot of the questioning out of the equation, right? Because as the classroom teacher, we think that as we explain and disseminate the information, that our students are processing it like we do. And then, they're reticent to ask questions. And so we think that they get what we're talking about. And so we press on. We go to the next level. And then maybe someone gets really brave and says, oh, Ms. Dahl, I don't understand that. And so as students are able to understand their own strengths and their weaknesses and can articulate those to us, and that comfortability level happens within the classroom dynamic, and our students can say, oh, wait a second, this is where I struggle to learn. My, whatever it is, it might be formulaic information is really hard for that certain brain. I really need to process slowly through formulas. So can you review that for me, Ms. Dahl? And so as we offer this to students and help them understand what mindfulness is, it's knowing who you are, it's being able to pay attention, and it's a skill, it's a learned skill, which is so wonderful because we're in the business of learning. And so all we have to do is say, oh, listen, you can absolutely do this. Just like you can learn math, you can learn Spanish, you can learn French, you can also learn mindfulness. And so here's how you do that. You minimize your distractions. So no cell phones. That's part of the big rule of no cell phones in school, is because we know that the brain can't multitask. And so many of you think that we're just cracking down on you because you're a teenager and you have a phone and blah, 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 blah. But no, it's because we know that the brain learns best when it's calm and focused. And to be focused on a single task for an extended period of time, at least 20 minutes, that's where the working memory can take the information, can layer it over what you already know, and can make that new information usable. The utility factor of information goes way up when you're mindful. So we first of all minimize our distractions. We come into current time. What am I learning? What class am I in, first of all, right? Oh yeah, here I am. I'm in Spanish now. Okay. I'm going to hablar español or whichever, right? Francés. I don't know how to say French in French. I better stick with Spanish.
Francés. You had it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And so that mindfulness is simply paying attention. I love that phrase because it's so natural for us. And I like to share that as long as there have been parents and there have been children, there has been mindfulness. Because parents are asking continually their children, oh, pay attention, right? We're out on a walk, going to the park. I got a kid on a bicycle and then I'm walking the dog and we're right on the sidewalk. Hey, you got to pay attention to traffic, right? I got the dog, I got you, but you need to really pay attention. So mindfulness is just this new kid, I don't know what, the trending term maybe, but we know what it is. And so when we can allow that, kind of that intuitive sense. Oh, yeah, I get that. That's mindfulness, paying attention. And again, you can't do it wrong because it's your narrative and it's layering in how you learn and process. Yeah. Anything else on what it is? I know sometimes it can be an uncomfortable, oh man, mindfulness, really, we have to, Does anybody have any big concerns? Aaron Bean left a comment here. I use this in my classroom, and when students know where they are, it allows them to be open to conversation and collaboration. It sets the tone for the class, and it also allows teens to successfully build relationships. Nice. So kind of as a keystone or a cornerstone of that classroom dynamic as we get started, we have successful relationships of trust. They know where they're going, collaboration between learners. Yeah. Fantastic.
It looks like Mariette had a question.
Oh, okay.
Is it possible to be mindful while doing an activity that calms
the brain?
Oh, that calms the brain.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that is the direction that we're heading. So thank you for bringing that up right now. We'll just dive into it. When we're looking at the learning brain, there's a lot of stuff happening, I would almost say, for every single person. And that might not be fair, every single person, but almost. That there is so much that we have to be able to hold in the container of our mind. And so our brain has to figure out what to process and what to not worry about. Our working memory can only hold about 7 or 8 chunks. In the education world, we chunk information. Our current working memory that's processing right now and helping us make sense of what's coming and knowing that we're looking at a screen and being able to read. So the working memory is relatively small. We get 7 or 8 chunks of information. To kind of calm a busy mind that has way more than 8 things going on in there, a mindful activity is absolutely going to calm the brain. And what do we mean by a mindful activity? oftentimes it's connected to a breathing practice. And those come a little bit later. But since we're here, let's go ahead and I'm kind of jumping around in the slide presentation. So Kelly, I'll have to give you some specific stuff as we move through because I'm covering some of it out of sequence for us. So mindful breathing, let's do one together now just so we kind of have that idea of calming the brain. So whenever we do a breathing, the most important thing about our physical body is to sit up tall so that the spine is tall, so that the nervous system from the cerebellum at the very bottom of your brain all the way down your spinal cord is long and straight, so the nerves have as much chance to kind of lengthen and unkink as they can. And then when the spine is tall, the rib cage is expansive, so we get a lot of space in the lungs for full respiration. And so we just sit up nice and tall. I'm just kind of thinking through this. I don't want to overwhelm you with too many things, but the essentials. The shoulders would like to be over the hips, and that helps open the belly. So when we kind of slump, if you just practice with me, slump in, and you can feel that your belly kind of, you get it compresses. Maybe you get a little belly wrinkle across the front, right? Oh, this is really hysterical to teach to high schoolers, right? Like, okay, feel your belly crunching. And then when you sit up with your shoulders over hips, do you feel how your belly lengthens and you have available space? Why is that important? Because through mindful breathing, we're going to let the belly expand really wide out in front of us. And what that does, the diaphragm is the circular muscle that hooks around the bottom of your rib cage. And ideally, well, the way that it is biologically designed to work, it's a flat muscle. When you inhale, it should go down. And so your belly needs to extend out in front of you so that there's room for your diaphragm to press down, and it presses the organs. When the diaphragm presses down, your lungs have space to expand fully. And so they get big and they can take in a full breath to oxygenate completely all the alveoli in the lungs. And then when you exhale, the diaphragm wants to press up and help press that air out of the lungs. And so the exhale, as the diaphragm goes up, the belly pulls back in toward the spine to facilitate the diaphragm pressing up into a dome. So that's what we're doing. And that's on a very physiological level, but I think it's helpful to understand how the body works, because the brain works on oxygen from our lungs, and so if we are not adequately breathing, we're sending signals into the brain that we are under threat. And when we're under threat, our body is in fight or flight, and the learning centers close down. And so this is part of what this emotional learning component is. And the more research that is done, the more we find how critical it is to be mindfully breathing. And so as we sit up tall, we'll breathe together now. Thank you for letting me share the physiology. I hope it's useful. When we sit up tall, we soften the belly. And, if your belly flops out over your waistband, perfect. Excellent. It's okay. And then when we inhale, the belly gets really big and round in front. Our lungs are filling up all the way. And then as we exhale, we very gently pull the belly back toward the spine. Just imagine inside your diaphragm making a little dome, pressing the air all the way out of the lungs. Inhale again, big, wide, soft belly. Exhale, belly in. Inhale, belly nice and wide out in front. And exhale. And then just do one more at your own pace. And that mindful breathing, you might be able to feel it for yourself. Just kind of check in. Do I have a sense of a little bit more calmness? Am I a little bit more quiet? Yeah. And then you can do this anywhere along the way in your class time. The first couple times with students, it might be a little awkward because it's so brand new. But just ask your kids, just be a good sport. We're going to learn something that science is really showing us helps the brain learn. And if you feel a little weird, that's okay. We all feel weird when we do new things, right? I see here a question from JP that I think with this breathing practice, we can answer this question. Is changing the term from mindfulness to self-awareness helpful for the students to not feel the SEL sting? And I think absolutely. Whatever, again, that common understanding gives us freedom to use vocabulary that's more applicable to the student mind and where that student is. And unfortunately, there is a stigma around SEL. I remember, again, when I was at Washoe, and our school was a pilot for Castle, and they gave us nothing really except here's what we're doing. And so I had to bring this into my students, and I said, this is what we'll be doing. It's called SEL, which is social emotional learning. And I guess word gets out on the street, with students. And my response in my classroom broke my heart. And it was common among, I had 6 classes at that time, all of them, that there was a perspective that this was for the retard class. And and that immediately, every teacher just goes on, whoa, when we hear that. And that's a huge problem. And so as we can really help students find a common understanding and remove the stigma of what this is, and no, this is not for special education. This is for you. Because you have that viewpoint, I mean, you're not going to tell this to your student, right? Because you have that viewpoint, this is specifically for you. Pay attention, right? However, when we can use words and phrases that take away that negative sense of what we're doing, yes, absolutely. And self-awareness is great. Paying attention. Hey, we're going to do our attention practice right now. You can call it attentional training, because to learn anything, you have to be paying attention to what you're doing. You have to be able to remember formulas, remember vocabulary. I mean, memorization is a natural part of learning. And you have to pay attention when you memorize. And so whatever words you like that feel authentic to you, that convey the understandings, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I'm just going to make sure that we're hitting all these comments here. Thank you for sharing. What about knitting? For me, it calms. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Knitting. My grandma was a big crocheter, so that was her activity to, she had 7 kids. So, wow, so she would crochet. And for her, that was to get calm and centered. So anything that that works for you. Again, your personal narrative is so important and so valuable. So if for you, and if it's not on a list anywhere of the scientific literature, who cares, right? If for you it works, yes, honor that. That's the beauty of it. So thank you for those questions. Anything else before we move into kind of and I'm going to do the history real quickly, and just capture the highlights of that. Anything else on mindfulness? Okay. And so these definitions are from the Nevada Department of Education, the Safe and Respectful Learning Offices. Just a second, I got one more here. Does this have a focusing effect with ADHD? Yes, it does have a focusing effect for ADHD students and people. And it's a little bit trickier to be able to come into a to be focused on one thing, the breath. And so for a very, even if you're not ADHD, but you're super agitated, those moments, when we can include tactile stuff, like touching the body, it works a lot better. And so just for the ADHD, if you do, I think it's called a 5-point breath. I might think of the 5 point, I don't remember the actual name, but you'll have a student hold up their hand and they'll trace from the heel of the hand and inhale up to the tip of the pinky, and then exhale to the center of the palm. Inhale up the length of the ring finger, exhale down to the center of the palm. Inhale, middle finger, exhale to the palm. Inhale, index finger, exhale to the palm. Inhale, thumb, exhale to the palm. And so that tactile physical sensation has, it takes up more working capacity of the brain. And so those brains that are wired to stay busy and stay distracted, if you can give them something to physically manipulate it, it'll be easier for that student rather than just trying to sit quietly and find your breath. Because that ADHD brain isn't going to sit quietly. And if you're super agitated, it might not sit quietly either. So yeah, and you can do other things. I mean, if you need to do elbow to finger so that the exhale is really, really long and slow, right? The exhale is where we release the stress. And so the longer you can make your exhale, the more of the stress chemical, the adrenaline and the cortisol, you're actually releasing on the breath. And so if that student needs more than just a fingertip to the center of the palm, go fingertip all the way to the elbow, exhale all the way to the elbow, inhale slowly all the way to the tip of the index finger. Exhale slowly all the way to the elbow. Yeah. Great question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, you guys got good questions. Yay. So the social emotional learning CASEL, and they've been around for 25 years. And in 2011, they did a national pilot with 5 different school districts across the nation. And so it's really from 2011 onward that they have really made an impact in the education world. They have 5 components of social emotional awareness. You can see them there on the bullet points, and I won't read them out loud for you. But those are the core foci, I guess, of what the social emotional learning is composed of. And then we have SEAD. Kelly, if that next slide. And the SEAD is just an expansion. It takes CASEL as the foundation and then builds up some walls. So it's a little bit bigger and more broad. And so you'll see in the parentheses, self-awareness, self-management, those are the 5 CASEL components. And then with SEAD, and this is, again, the NDE has really adopted this. So we're going to take those 5 core competencies and move them into a whole lifelong process that each individual that comes out of our care with a social emotional foundation is going to be effective at acquiring and applying knowledge, attitudes, and skills. So we move the learning from just the content, the knowledge, but we help each student develop a growth mindset, an optimistic attitude, and we give them the skills to be able to do that so that they can manage their emotions, set and achieve their goals, be empathetic and compassionate, which creates the flavor of the relationships, and then that they can develop the decision-making skills. So both of those acronyms, the SEL and the SEAD, they interweave. Can they be used interchangeably? Yes. Yes, they can. And so where did this all start? The next slide, Kelly, will give us the 3 main players in the social emotional world. There's a tiny little book called The Triple Focus, and it is so, so good. If you can order it on Amazon for like $14, I highly recommend it. I did not come across this book until about 2 years ago. And once I did, it clarified every sense of well, why does Castle have to have, why are they the clearinghouse? We get these things of, well, who says that we have to do this? Why is the NDE demanding that we do SEL? Why? And so as educators, we know our subject area, we know our students, we know pedagogy, we know how to best affect our students so that learning happens. So who are these people telling us that we have to now do social emotional learning? And these people are amazing. They are so amazing. And so the triple focus will give us a really clear understanding of how it all started. And I'll just summarize super briefly. It was in 1987. 1987 in New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale University is. The school district wondered. No, it was actually the mayor. The wrong side of town, the other side of town from Yale, they had kids dropping out left and right. Teenage pregnancy was off the board. It was, that time when Say No to Drugs and Nancy Reagan and all of that. There were all kinds of programs, DARE, that you would think would help students to not get pregnant, to finish high school, to be successful on, at that time, standardized testing, right? And to make a successful transition to next level school. It was not happening in this part of town. And so the mayor of New Haven, Connecticut said, oh my gosh, we have got to do something. There is no reason that these kids in this town need to be failing this tragically. And so he paired up with Dr. Roger Weisberg, who was at Yale. He was a psychologist, and they created kind of an advisory board. School district, teachers, members of town. Roger Weisberg from Yale was the head of the whole thing. But they had psychologists, social work, they had the whole gamut of people who are concerned with children being successful in school. And Roger Weisberg created the first program, and it was called, it just slipped my mind, the Social Learning Program, I think it was called. I have it in my notes on my other slide. Social Development Curriculum. And the mayor's question, our kids are really in trouble. What can we do to help them? And so it was in 1987. And that was the very start of bringing in social learning so that we could understand, how do students learn best? We're obviously in a social situation, in a classroom. How does social interaction affect learning? And then from that social perspective, the researchers had to start going into the individual, the emotional part of an individual. So it started first as a whole society. How can we help our kids? Researchers and scientists from Yale bringing in this program and then expanding that into, each kid has their own story. We better start paying attention and make sure they know that that story is valued. And so that was the start, and that got going. And then we have Dr. Mark Greenberg, and I don't have the dates on him. It was early 90s, and he, along with a psychologist she's in Washington State now, Dr. Carol Couchet, they co-founded the PATHS program, which is, I cannot remember the acronym. In their kindergarten, they've expanded. When they started, they were K through 6, and now they're pre-K. And you know what? Let me just real quick do a Google search, because it really is worth knowing what their thing stands for. I'm sorry I didn't have that right in my notes. I thought I did. And so Dr. Mark Greenberg, after his work with Dr. Carol Couchet to construct this PATHS curriculum, he co-founded CASEL, the Consortium of Academic Social Emotional Learning. And so this CASEL came about as a product of communities being, we got to do something to help our kids. There is no reason that these kids should be failing like they're failing. So it stems from the people who care most about students, their educators, their families, and their communities. And then since this was a community-wide approach, higher education, psychology, educational pedagogical methods were brought in to create. And so that's where it comes from. And I really think that once we understand that history, we're a little less resistant. Oh, that's SEL. That's that emotional stuff. Like I have to kumbaya and that kind of. No. This was all created by people in the know because things were going drastically wrong. And so they came up with a solution. They tested the social learning programs with Dr. Roger Weisberg were tested and tweaked and changed for many years. Oh, thank you. Someone put the PATHS program up there. Yeah. Oh, you guys are so awesome putting links up. Thank you. And I am on the PATHS thing, but I just can't find in their literature where it actually tells you what PATHS mean. It's something about being able to assess and monitor your thinking and your behavior processing. I'll see if I can find that and then send it off to Kelly. Did anyone find? Oh, I'm so sorry. I feel like a big nitwit right now because I don't have that on my notes. Anyway. So PATHS is still, it's utilized in a lot of schools around the country. It's been used in Norway, the UK, Australia. They're looking into Japan right now. I've collaborated with them on a couple of projects, and they're really fantastic as a foundational for the elementary level. And then the Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute it's a big organization, and they just have one of the many arms is social emotional academic development, and they use exclusively SEAD. They don't use SEL. And Dr. Mary Helen E. Mordino Yang, she has done a lot of work for them on the brain science of the emotional and social component of learning. And there's a brief in there, and I think in the end of these slides there's a link, and her work for Aspen is called The Brain Basis for Integrated Social Emotional Academic Development, how emotions and social relationships drive learning. And so I highly recommend that you read this brief. She's very, very scientific. Last summer I did a big week-long 45-hour workshop with her, and she is absolutely fantastic. She is not an educator, and so as she presented her science, there were so many questions from the group. Well, how do you apply this? And here's what she said: that's up to you. You are the educator. You know pedagogy. You know your dynamic classroom environment. So she brought us back to that common understanding, and then sent us out to figure the best application for our setting. And we all know that each school is so different, each community. I mean, we can look at rural, we can look at urban. And so we know the differences. And so to be able to have the freedom, and this is what the Aspen Institute, their goal is. Here's a framework. Here's a scaffold, if you will. And you take the information and tailor it to your community of learners. It's not a prescription. Oh, thank goodness. It is not a prescription. And with that freedom, we can take our common understanding of what SEL and SEAD are, how they can apply to help our students achieve. And then the neat part about this shift in education, working home, schooling from home and teaching from home, is that we have had to make adjustments. We have really had to take a close look at what are the critical factors to student success. And we've known for a long time, relationship skills, top of the list. And so we can understand how those social relationships drive learning through our own, each teacher, you say to yourself, me, Miss Dahl, my personal narrative, my experience. That is a huge foundational component of how I create relationships with my students and how those relationships drive their academic progress. And to me, that's like one of the most exciting things ever in the world of education, because we have been given that freedom to tailor it, to apply it how it's going to work best for our unique and individual needs. And so with the Mindful Seed, that's the message that we share. Yes, The research has been done. Yes, we can now look at the brain. It's out there. It's available for us to read and study and integrate into the self so that we can best address our unique and individual learners. So remember when differentiated learning came on the scene and how frustrating it was that we thought that we had to tailor our lesson plan to each single student and do different assessments? And we were... Oh, I have a massive echo. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. And so that differentiated learning thing was heavy and like, what do you want me to do? Man, since then, and the research that has come has said, yes, education should be differentiated, and here's how you do that. You do it. You are the subject matter expert, and you have the freedom. And it doesn't mean a different assessment for every child. No, it means honoring the relationship that you have with every student. And that's what the differentiation is. That has to be the defining characteristic that we go to and hold on to with the differentiated component of learning. It's knowing each student. It's knowing where they are. It's knowing how much they can process. It's being aware that, oh, something's a little off today. You're not your usual bubbly self. Everything okay? And so we can, check in with our kids where they are. And maybe for that day, that student needs quiet reading and they don't need to be involved in the class discussion. But how do I know that? Because of my relationship with that student. I've been paying attention, and this is where the mindfulness drops right in. I'm paying attention to the students that are under my care. And is it a ton of work? Absolutely. I mean, how many students do you have every day, right? And then being separated from them and not being able to see them and physically interact with them, that's another tricky point that we'll have to navigate, and that you guys have done a fantastic job for the last several months of doing that, of holding that container, you as the teacher, knowing your students because you've had that time during the course of the year to establish those relationships, and then to let those morph and still happen through a screen. There was a little thought that kind of caught the edge of my mind. I don't want to lose it. Oh, it was back to that paying attention, back to that mindfulness. As teachers, and I've worked in a lot of different fields, and I've worked with a lot of different adults in my last 3 years of life. As teachers, and this is my own observation, so take it with a grain of salt and then kind of explore for your own self. Teachers, above all other adults, pay attention so much more. Because we deal with 150 kids on a daily basis. We have to know them. We have to know the dynamic of each class. And they're all different. We have to know our content knowledge inside and out so that we can shape it to this kind of a learner versus that kind of learner. That differentiated stuff. Some kids are not going to be able to read and process. They have to touch and do. We have to know our pedagogy. And so our brains have this enormous capacity to process multiple things in a single moment of current time. And we pay attention. We have to. We do it all day long. So our attentional skills are off the charts. Okay, and that's not to say that other adults don't pay attention. Not at all. The amount of incoming information and relationship stuff and drama and whatever that we have to pay attention to trains our minds as educators to a different level of mindful awareness. And so as we bring this into SEAD, we're already doing it. That's the really cool part about it. It's not one more thing you have to do. It's kind of the way that you have been operating since you've been in the classroom, refining your skills every year, as mentioned earlier, knowing your weaknesses, knowing your strengths, knowing how to use those strengths to build, how to continually fortify the areas of growth that you have. And so keeping yourself at the center of your awareness so that you can keep all those plates in the air. Yeah. And then anything else on this? I'll finish up with the history, and that was all kind of the why and the what of this too. with this triple focus, Daniel Goleman is the foremost expert in the United States anyway, some people would say the world, on emotional intelligence. He coined that term, emotional intelligence. And so his work for his whole 45 years worth of science and psychology and research is the emotions. And so he partnered then with Roger Weisberg to build out this emotional development, or the social development curriculum. And so we have Roger Weisberg, Dr. Roger Weisberg, Dr. Daniel Goleman, and Dr. Mark Greenberg as the founders. All psychologists, all educators, and lifetimes. And none of them are young now, right? So they've been at this for their entire lifetimes. And they're in the know. They're in the know. So this isn't something that comes from a legislative body that has never been in a classroom, which is very encouraging to us as teachers. This comes from our people. These are our people who created the social emotional learning and social emotional academic development programs. Okay. And that, I'll let you, Kelly, I'm hoping that you'll be able to share this PowerPoint with others, and you can just read through the triple focus. This is just a snapshot of what the three foci are, and with this inner focus, this is the bulk of what the SE, the social emotional part of education is that. And then I'm looking over here at some of the comments, and thank you so much, you guys are great. So let's just catch up on the comments, and I want to check my time. Oh yeah, it's time for a get up and move. So before I check in with the comments, let's pause here. Let's do a get up and move. We've been at this for 55 minutes, which is actually a little longer than I wanted for us to go. So let's get up and move. If you need a bio break and you just need to get away from your screen, please take that. Well, let's reconvene at in 5 minutes. Would that work? Sorry, looking at my. Would that work for everybody? In 5 minutes, we'll reconvene. Okay, so we'll take a little bio break and we'll reconvene, and then we'll move a little bit. All right, perfect. Thank you.